The world was stunned as the United States announced sweeping tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars of Chinese goods, sending shockwaves through global markets and diplomatic circles alike. A move that shattered decades of economic policy and upended the rules that had governed international trade since the end of the Cold War. This wasn't just a trade dispute, it was economic warfare, a direct challenge to the foundations of globalization that had fueled prosperity for both nations. The global financial system trembled as stock markets plunged and supply chains scrambled to adapt, with investors fearing a prolonged standoff between the world's two largest economies. For years, the US and China had been locked in a profitable, if uneasy, partnership, each benefiting from the other's strengths, even as tensions simmered beneath the surface. Suddenly, that era was over. Factories that once buzzed with activity now stood silent, and uncertainty rippled through communities dependent on trade. The tariffs targeted the core of China's export-driven economy, exposing its reliance on the American market as a critical vulnerability and threatening millions of jobs. In Beijing, the shock was both economic and psychological. The sense of security that came from decades of growth was suddenly shaken. The US, once the architect of global integration, was now actively pushing China out, signaling a dramatic shift in its approach to international relations. The leadership realized that simply plugging into the American-led order was no longer an option. A new strategy was urgently needed. China faced a stark choice: adapt or fall behind. The stakes were nothing less than the nation's future prosperity and global standing. The Communist Party saw its legitimacy threatened, as prosperity and stability were at risk. The pressure to respond decisively was immense. The tariffs became a catalyst for a new strategy, one that would seek economic independence and resilience, investing in innovation and homegrown industries. The world watched as China prepared to forge a new path, no longer dependent on the goodwill or markets of a strategic rival, but determined to chart its own destiny. This was the starting gun for a race toward self-sufficiency, technological advancement, and a reimagined role on the world stage. The global order was shifting and the stakes had never been higher. Every nation now had to reconsider its alliances and economic strategies. The era of cooperation had ended, open competition had begun, with both sides racing to secure their futures in an uncertain world. The tariff shock marked the dawn of a new economic era, one defined by rivalry, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of national strength. The so-called trade war was far more than tariffs and deficits. It was a clash of systems, values, and ambitions on a global scale. It was a battle over visions for the future, with each side determined to shape the world in its own image. The US championed free markets, open competition, and democracy. China, on the other hand, promoted state-driven capitalism, long-term planning, and social stability. Both economies were deeply intertwined, their supply chains and financial systems linked, but that interdependence had become a source of friction, not peace, as mutual suspicion grew. For America, China's rapid rise threatened its global dominance and challenged the established world order. For China, US pressure only fueled a powerful narrative of national rejuvenation and resistance to foreign interference. The real battleground was technology. Whoever led in AI, 5G, and quantum computing would not just gain economic power, but also the ability to set global standards and influence societies everywhere. The US moved aggressively to block Chinese access to critical tech, especially semiconductors, escalating the conflict into a full-blown tech war that reverberated across industries worldwide. This was a struggle for control over the future, not just the present, a contest to determine who would lead the next technological revolution. The rivalry was now about who would set the rules for the next era, influencing not just their own citizens, but the entire world. The world was witnessing a contest for global leadership, with technology, innovation, and influence at its very heart. The outcome would define the balance of power for decades to come, shaping the lives of billions and the future of our interconnected world. China hit back with its own tariffs, targeting politically sensitive American exports, but Beijing knew a tit-for-tat trade war was only a short-term response. Behind the scenes, China launched a sweeping strategy to reduce its dependence on the US and transform its economy. The plan: shift from export-led growth to a model driven by domestic consumption and innovation. Billions were poured into R&D, especially in semiconductors and AI, to break reliance on foreign technology. The government framed this as a new, long march, a national struggle for economic sovereignty. Patriotic sentiment was mobilized to support tough reforms and costly transitions. The real counterpunch was a long-term project to secure China's future, not just win a trade skirmish. The US pressure, meant to weaken China, instead accelerated its transformation. China's answer was a historic pivot inward, unlocking the power of its own consumers. The government expanded social safety nets and made credit more accessible, encouraging people to spend rather than save. Massive investments in infrastructure and urban quality of life aimed to boost domestic demand. The goal turned China's population into a powerful engine of growth. Simultaneously, Beijing declared a people's war on technological dependence, pouring resources into building a homegrown semiconductor industry. The Made in China 2025 plan quietly guided investment into high-tech sectors like robotics and electric vehicles. The strategy was dual: build a consumer-driven economy and a technologically independent industrial base. The pivot inward was about resilience, ensuring China could thrive even if cut off from the West. This was the foundation for a new era of self-reliance. Central to China's strategy was the creation of national champions, domestic firms groomed to dominate at home and compete globally. The state provided these companies with cheap loans, favorable contracts, and protection from foreign rivals. Giants like Alibaba, Tencent, BYD, and Huawei became symbols of China's ambitions, thriving with government backing. Policy and business goals were tightly aligned, giving these firms a formidable edge. Critics called it unfair competition, but for Beijing it was pragmatic, essential for national strength. The approach fueled rapid growth but also raised concerns about monopolies and innovation. In a world of geopolitical rivalry, nurturing corporate giants was seen as vital to China's economic security. China's new doctrine, dual circulation, redefined its economic playbook. The focus shifted to strengthening the domestic cycle of production and consumption, making the home market the main growth engine. External trade was reimagined as a supplement, not the core. The strategy aimed to import what China couldn't make, export high-value goods, and diversify trade partners. Policies boosted infrastructure, household incomes, and tech self-reliance, while seeking new global markets and promoting the renminbi. Dual circulation was about de-risking building a resilient economy in a fragmented world. The era of hyper-globalization was over. Selective integration was the new norm. China sought to insulate itself from external shocks, managing global ties on its own terms. The blueprint was clear: security and self-sufficiency above all. The Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, became China's tool for reshaping global trade and influence. Massive infrastructure projects across Asia, Africa, and beyond created new markets for Chinese goods and secured access to vital resources. The BRI also built political alliances, offering development where Western aid was slow or conditional. Critics warned of debt traps and environmental risks, but for many countries, China delivered tangible benefits. The BRI expanded China's economic and diplomatic reach, building a network of partners outside the US-led system. It was a long-term investment in a new global order, with China at the center. The initiative deepened China's integration with emerging markets, bypassing traditional power structures. Through the BRI, China methodically rewired the world's economic map. China's path to economic independence faces daunting internal obstacles. The property sector crisis has shaken consumer confidence and threatens financial stability. An aging population and shrinking workforce strain the economy and social safety net, making the shift to a consumption-driven model harder. Mountains of debt, local, corporate, and national, limit Beijing's policy options and threaten long-term growth. Technological self-sufficiency remains elusive. Despite massive investment, China still lags in advanced chip-making. Breaking decades of dependency on foreign tech is a slow, costly process. Innovation requires openness and global collaboration, areas where China's system faces limits. These structural challenges are as serious as any external pressure. The leadership must balance reform, stability, and growth, all while navigating a turbulent global environment. The road to self-reliance is long and uncertain. China's ascent is not guaranteed, China's strategic pivot is dramatically reshaping the global order, signaling what many see as the end of American-led globalization, as we've known it for decades. The balance of power is shifting, and the world is watching closely. The world is fragmenting into competing economic blocs, as nations rethink their alliances and priorities. Supply chains are being reconfigured, with security and resilience now taking precedence over pure efficiency and cost. Parallel tech ecosystems are rapidly emerging, one dominated by American innovation, the other by Chinese advancements, effectively splitting the digital world into two distinct spheres of influence. Middle-power countries now find themselves with more leverage than ever before, skillfully playing the giants off each other to secure better deals and more favorable terms for their own interests. The US is no longer the sole superpower. Its influence is diffusing across a growing number of states and regions, creating a more multipolar world where power is shared and contested. China is actively building an alternative system of trade, finance, and technology, aiming to rival and perhaps even surpass the West's long-standing dominance in these arenas. The great question now is whether these competing systems can coexist peacefully, or if the world is inevitably heading toward a new Cold War, marked by rivalry and tension. The stakes are truly global, touching every nation and every citizen, and the outcome of this contest will define not just the next few years, but the entire century ahead. The contest is not just economic, it's about who gets to set the rules, values, and standards that will shape the future of our interconnected world. The world is watching with anticipation and uncertainty as a new era of global power and influence unfolds before our eyes.